réunion 82 du Comité permanent des comptes publics de la Chambre des...
This is the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee. Today we are meeting to study the issue of Sustainable Development Technology Canada.
Mr. Hayes, the Deputy Auditor General, it's good to have you back, sir. Mr. Hayes, I understand you have a brief statement. You have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Mr. Chair, thank you for inviting me to appear before the committee as part of its study on Sustainable Development Technology Canada. I'd like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people.
Our office has decided to conduct an audit on how Sustainable Development Technology Canada is financing sustainable development technologies within the portfolio of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada. This decision comes in response to recent discussions with the department and information received by our office. Je serai heureux de répondre aux questions du comité.
I'm happy to answer the committee's questions where possible. However, since we just began the audit, we have yet to finalize its scope. We are hoping to present our report to Parliament in 2024 before the summer recess. We look forward to appearing again before the committee at that time.
Here's my opening remarks. Thank you, and I'm prepared to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. And again, I appreciate, just on behalf of community members, of your office updating Parliament on your office's activity. I turn now to Mr. Barrett. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, for being here on behalf of the Office of the Auditor General this morning. This issue has obviously captured a lot of media interest and public interest in recent days, and I understand that your office has been engaged on it for some time. Can you tell us on what date your office first communicated with the whistleblowers?
So I believe that our first encounter with the whistleblowers was in November 2022. There was a number of meetings between November and January with the whistleblowers. A presentation was made to our office. Information had been shared in November, December, January. Would you like me to continue with what happened after that?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd like to find out what your advice to them was, and then maybe if we need to look back at any of that previous timeline, we can.
When we receive information from any party, that information is taken into consideration as we determine what our audit priorities are going to be. In this case, with the information that we received, given the nature of the organization of SDTC, and particularly with Governor and Council appointees, we reached out to the Privy Council office, senior officials there, at the end of January, early February. The Privy Council office turned the matter over to ISED. And I guess I should say that when we engaged with the Privy Council office, it was to make the connection between the whistleblowers and the Privy Council office. The Privy Council office turned the material over to ISED, and then ISED had carriage of the file after that.
So why wasn't an audit initiated when this was first brought to your attention? It's since been evidenced that gross mismanagement has occurred at Sustainable Development Technologies Canada. So why didn't you initiate an audit at first?
So the allegations that we have received, we have to recognize that SDTC, the foundation, is more arm's length than the normal department that we audit. We do have a mandate to follow funding agreements, and that's what SDTC has with the federal government. In our view, at the time, it was preferable to see what management's response was going to be to the allegations, and then for us to keep our eye on it and determine when or if an audit would be appropriate.
Okay. Have you seen the fact-finding report that was precipitated by this referral to PCO and later ISED, the report by RCGT?
Yes, we received a copy on October 3rd. I've reviewed the redacted version. I know that our team has an unredacted version.
Okay. So you have not seen the unredacted version?
No, and that's more because I haven't asked for it from our team. I've reviewed the redacted version.
So that report evidences that the chair and the CEO are both in conflicts of interest, that tens of millions of dollars have been given to ineligible companies, and we still have Sustainable Development Technologies Canada saying that they're good stewards of taxpayer dollars. How can both of those things be true at the same time?
So the reason, one of the main reasons why we are going into audit is because the report is equivocal. The report from RCGT is equivocal. It leaves room for interpretation, and I'll point to particular statements. There are, on the conflict of interest side, it says the conflict of interest policy appears to not have been consistently followed. SDTC did not appear to follow the recovery requirement. A recipient of COVID-19 relief payments appeared to be ineligible. There's a bunch of statements like this, and we want to get our audit work done to identify what is in fact happening there. We don't have a view yet. We will do our audit work and determine a view, but this report from RCGT left a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah, I think that that's well said, if not a bit understated. I want to offer you some quotes that we've heard from a senior official with ISED, the CFO, Mr. McConaughey. Quote, preliminary findings of the fact-find exercise, there is smoke around the majority of allegations. That was in May. In July, he said, quote, it was free money. It's almost a sponsorship scandal level kind of giveaway. In August, he said a lot of sloppiness and laziness, outright incompetence. The minister's going to flip out when he hears this stuff. Then in September, quote, the report implicates the board in terrible ways by not following the process, by not following the COI, conflict of interest regime, by not being prudent fiduciaries, end quote. Are you familiar with, have you heard these recordings, and were they furnished to you by the whistleblowers?
So I don't know whether the whistleblowers have given it to our audit team. Our audit team hasn't told me that they've received that. Over the last week, the department had informed me, in fact, that there would likely be a report about recordings of their staff. I haven't heard those recordings at this point in time. That actually didn't factor into our decision to launch the audit. You know,
prior to your launching the audit, I did write a letter to your office requesting an audit, having heard some of the very troubling allegations. There's bulk approvals, bulk payments to companies that didn't ask for it and didn't need it. In some cases, in conflicts of interest from board executive members who were involved. And the external reviewers said that the funds should not be paid. But millions of payments were paid out right at year end and were just enough to meet targets so the CEO and her friends could get bonus. Isn't that highly suspicious?
So as I said, the decision to launch this audit was made on the basis of our review of the RCGT report. We did receive your letter on October 30th. We informed ISED and the department and SDTC on the 26th that we were launching an audit.
Mr. Hayes.
We'll be you'll be receiving a response back.
Thank you. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 6 minutes now, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, it's always interesting and educational for us to receive a representative from the Auditor General's office. Thank you very much, Mr. Hayes, for being here on this and to walk us through some of the process. Because indeed, I think this is an example of where initiatives were taken, and rightfully so, in the objective manner that they should be. A situation was brought to the attention of the Auditor General's office, if I understand correctly. It was referred, and I'd like to have your comments on that again as to why it was referred to the Privy Council office or how that works. And now this decision has come forward independently of any request that was made of Parliament for the Auditor General's office to do an audit. So can you explain a little bit about, again, about that initial process for Canadians to understand, to reassure Canadians about the independent process that we have here, the institutions that work on behalf of Canadians to ensure that funds are properly deployed, and the process that makes your office indeed to conduct an audit of this kind.
Yes, thank you for that question. I contacted, and it was me that contacted the Privy Council office representatives in late January of this year, after our audit team had been receiving information from the complainants. From my perspective, the PCO officials acted quickly. The reason why we contacted the Privy Council office was because there are a number of governor and council appointees on the board of directors, and also appointed as members of the foundation. So with that in mind, we reached out to the Privy Council office. After that, given that this is a foundation under the umbrella of the Minister of ISED, I know that the matter was transferred over there. We decided to do this audit after careful consideration. We looked at the RCGT report that was released on October 3rd. We looked at the statement that was issued by the foundation around that time. I think it was October 3rd. It might have been the 4th. And we looked at the action plan, management's action plan. And we determined that while many of the actions were forward-looking, we wanted to make sure that the eligible recipients who were receiving payments got the right amount. If there were ineligible payments, they were recovered. The processes, if there were any conflicts of interest or other process problems, that they're identified so that things can be improved in the future, money recovered that shouldn't have been paid. This was a matter that we had been following. We have mobilized our office to be able to do this work without compromising other audits, but as everybody here knows, we don't have auditors sitting around doing nothing. So we've had to be creative with that. But we recognize that this is something that needs to be addressed in our audit work very quickly.
Thank you for that. And indeed, we recently had the meeting with the Auditor General and the team concerning the sort of the usual roster, the regular roster of reports, of audit reports. And we know from previous testimony that the Auditor General's office has been tested in so far as being able to have the resources to conduct audits, to the extent, and that has to do with a number of factors, of course, the pandemic being a key one, but also staffing and so on. So can you explain, what happens then to the usual audits? Does this take priority? What is the usual sort of call to action?
Yeah, I'll make one quick comment. As we've said to this committee before, and typically when we're talking about our audit planning and our departmental plan, the independence of the office is important. The ability that we have to choose the places that we are going to go is a hallmark of our independence. And in this case, this was an audit that we decided to do. We're planning so that it doesn't derail any of our audits that have already been started or on the books. At this point in time, we don't expect that anything will have to be delayed or canceled. We're going to do this one in addition to the other work that we had planned. But to be perfectly honest, we are grabbing our qualified auditors from across the office, including in our services, to be able to help us. We've got very skilled people in our services that have moved from the audit practices into there that are going to help us out on this.
Well, that is good to hear that you have the resources and the people with the skill set to conduct this kind of audit. Are there other bodies, agencies that you consult with? I'm thinking the Ethics Commissioner, for example. You're talking about conflict of interest, and what is your engagement with the Department of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development?
So we haven't reached out to the Ethics Commissioner on this. Quite frankly, we are in the scoping phase of this audit, and we're looking at everything at this point. But I can say that with respect to the department, we've had regular discussions with them at least since July, and even more so since September, as the report was anticipated and after the report was presented. So the lines of communication are open with the department. I've been
Et
happy with
merci
the
beaucoup,
information
Mr.
that we've been
Hayes.
receiving.
Le temps est fini. Madame Séclair.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mrs. Desgagnés, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Hayes, for coming here to answer our questions. Indeed, the Auditor General has made a very interesting announcement. We have known about this issue for several months. Can you confirm to my colleagues that you had already been informed of the situation, that you've been looking into it for quite some time? How long have you been looking into this issue? We received the information from individuals who contacted our office last November, at the end of November 2022. And these people have been in regular contact with the office. Or you're talking about the whistleblowers? I think that these were employees, perhaps former employees from the foundation. Thank you. And you also said previously that you were in the phase where you were defining the scope of your audit. Can you confirm what has been spent? This $400 million that was announced, how was the money spent? Have you assessed it? Will all of this be included in your report? I don't know exactly what will be included, if it's going back to 2017 or another date, but I can confirm your questions regarding the recipients of the money, those who have been overpaid, and perhaps there was some conflict of interest involved. I don't know right now if we're able to look at the human resources issue, but that's a question that goes beyond the scope of our mandate. And what can you tell us about the scope of your mandate? Because right now the scope hasn't been well defined, but how far will you go in disclosing the names of the recipients, on what has been done, and whether or not this millions of dollars that were given to the SDTC were used properly? Certainly, we want to make observations about the recipients. When we look at the latest report on COVID benefits, for example, we may give a comprehensive amount in the recommendations, but it's impossible for me right now to tell you with confidence that we will be mentioning the recipients. And in your audit, back in 2017, you did do a report on Technology Canada, and the main conclusions, well, they were recommendations that were minor in nature. What has changed over the past few years? Is it the governance that it's changed? In your opinion, what changed from the time of that report? That's the exact question we want to look at. We will be looking at the board of SDTC, and as you said, the observations were positive at that time. Thank you. So you don't have any information that was sent over the past year from former employees? However, they no doubt gave you information. Why today, $400 million later, why don't things seem to operate correctly at SDTC? These are all issues that the audit team are in the process of examining. Thank you. Do you know Whether this $400 million was spent, I don't know now. This is something that we want to take a look at. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have remaining? 1 minute. With respect to the discussions with the department, I imagine you've already begun discussions with ISCD. Do the officials seem to want to cooperate and help you with this study? All of the discussions that we've had with the department have been positive. I have no issue in my ability to get information. With respect to SDDC, are they cooperating with you? The SDDC team has started to discuss matters, but I don't know. I'm not aware of the relationship between the foundation. And when were you able to tell us once the audit? When do you plan to finish the audit? We're hoping that we'll be able to table the report over the summer, in this summer. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Chile, good day. You are joining us online, and you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank Mr. Hayes for being present here. I think it's a critical issue that we're seeing, not just, I think, in this instance, but it's a troubling pattern we've seen in Canadian governments, both this government and the previous government, where we've seen these issues of conflicts of interest arise, and particularly when they're dealing with public and private partnerships. One issue with those public and private partnerships is, in fact, the governance issues, which I think this is a perfect case of some of those issues, mismanagement, HR issues that are being present in the media. And of course, I'm more than certain within your scope currently. But one of the issues I think that is not often discussed is the actual practice of the board members and how those governance how good governance, or in this case, bad governance, can translate to things like breaches of the conflict of interest policies, which is probably the most severe and one of the largest ethical breaches that can be made when governments are entrusted with public funds. And so my questions will be in relation to those three things. I know you've already answered questions directly in relation to scope, but could you share with us how large that scope is in terms of timing and framing of the SDTC. It's my understanding that SDTC was founded in 2001. It received a partnership agreement between 2013 of $325 million over the course of 8 years, which would bring us to 2020 from 2013, and then of course a newer agreement, $1 billion over 5 years. Would your scope take into consideration the multitude of these agreements, and not just the one we're currently facing with, but previous ones? Because I think what we're dealing with here is structural rot. I don't think these things happen overnight. I don't think they happen in a vacuum. I don't think they happen in isolation. I think they happen because consequential, as time goes on, they're not held accountable continuously over and over and over. And we see that with Indigenous Services Canada when it comes to clean water, multiple governments continuing to fail there. So it's imperative that we actually look at the root causes of why we see non-adherence to conflict of interest policies, and what I perceive as a huge and gross misconduct by the lack of appropriate governance. So my first question is on scope. Would you consider, would you take into account considerations that look at prior funding arrangements, particular to its founding in 2001?
Thank you for the question. We did do an audit through the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development in 2017. So we do know that there is a line in the sand at that point in time. We do always reserve the right to look behind the scope that we set if we see things that warrant a deeper dive. But I would suspect that our audit scope will be at some point, it will start at some point after 2017.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mr. Hayes. My second question is on the topics of the scope. Would the human resource concerns also be brought up in this scope of work from your audit team?
So we are aware that the human resources allegations that have been made by maybe current and former employees, I'm not entirely sure, that's a major concern for many people. Our mandate given that this is a foundation that is at arm's length from the government, and in fact even at more arm's length than what a Crown corporation would be in terms of our audit mandate, we're not sure how far we're going to be able to go into the HR considerations. However, we are looking at that. We very well might ask every question that we want and see what happens, but we have to respect our mandate. That's clear.
And as part of that mandate, looking at, for example, ISED, Innovation Science, and their ministry in relation to the actual, not collective agreements, sorry, the contribution agreements that put in particular detail the government's commitments to a variety of equity and human rights and human resource priorities. Do you think that would be taken into consideration in your scope in relation to human resources, or would you take that as an avenue to better investigate issues of human resources?
So the funding agreement becomes a centerpiece of our mandate. With a foundation that receives money like this from the government, it's structured in a very different way than, say, a department or a Crown corporation. So our audit mandate will actually focus us into what's happening under the funding agreement. I know that this is probably not a popular thing to say, but these funding agreements are basically going to set the limits around our mandate. What the corporation does, what the foundation does with its business that's not related to the funding agreement becomes more difficult for us to audit. And I don't know at this point in time how much of a hook we have into the human resources area.
So in some ways, Mr. Hayes, you can see my concern with that in the fact that the government could, not just in this instance, but in other instances, partner with groups, Crown corporations or even lesser than in this instance, that could in fact practice bad or mispractice, have bad practices of human resources and still have a contribution from the government. Is that correct?
I'm not sure that I'm in a position to comment on that. I mean, the way that these foundations are set up, there's a policy reason. It's the government that decides that. Parliament set up this organization in legislation. We are going to do our audit work in the best way that we can. Obviously, we'll set out in the audit report what the lines of accountability are, and they might be very different than what we're used to seeing with Crown corporations and the like. The department might not have the same degree of influence over this organization as what they would have otherwise.
Thank you. That is the time. We now turn to Mr. Cooper. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Hayes, in answer to a previous question, you noted that the Auditor General had conducted an audit of SDTC, a report that was issued in 2017 and covered the period between 2006 and 2017. I would note that in that report, the Auditor General found that at the time, SDTC had a, quote, rigorous and objective processes in place to assess, approve, and monitor projects, end of quote, and, quote, had measures in place to mitigate potential conflicts of interest, end of quote, and had, quote, extensive due diligence process, quote, end of quote, that was followed. Do you have any reason to doubt that the Auditor General was given inaccurate or incomplete information to draw those conclusions?
No, I don't. So if I could just make two comments about that. If we ever have concerns about access to information or the sufficiency of information, it's our duty to bring it to Parliament. And I know that in this case, at the time I was the head of our legal services, there wasn't an issue around that. If I might just add one thing, I'll put it this way. Positive conclusions in our audit report are even more concerning to me, frankly, because when we find positive things, we want to make sure that there's no negatives that might be hiding. So when we report a positive to Parliament, it's because it's positive.
Okay. Thank you for that. And since that audit, Liberal Industry Minister Navdeep Bains, as he was then, appointed a personal friend of Justin Trudeau as chair of SDTC. Since the appointment of that individual, a cloud of gross mismanagement, fraud, and corruption has descended upon SDTC, and I would submit that that is supported by the RCGT independent report. You said, sir, in answer to a question posed by Mr. Barrett, that findings in that report are equivocal. However, I would respectfully challenge you on that submission in that, for example, at 2.3.1 of the RCGT report, it is stated, quote, when brought to the Board of Directors for approval, the COVID-19 relief payments to active companies were found not to have followed the corporation's conflict of interest procedures and that board members did not recuse themselves. That involved some $38 million of taxpayers' money that went out the door in which board members were in a conflict of interest, did not recuse themselves, approved the money. That is not an equivocal finding. That is an unequivocal finding that there were breaches of the conflict of interest procedures.
So I would say that we will do our audit work to determine, in our opinion, what is and is not present there. I make the statement about the findings are equivocal in the very same section, but in the summary of key observations, the way that is presented is conflict of interest policy may not have been followed for COVID relief payment initiatives. I understand entirely what you're saying. I think that when I use the word equivocal, I mean that it leaves it open to different interpretations, and that's exactly what's here.
For certainly language in the report that is very unequivocal. And would you agree that at the very least the RCGT report raises serious questions about mismanagement, conflicts of interest, and potential wrongdoing at SDTC? Would you agree with that?
The reading the RCGT report, the statements in there and the unanswered questions was one of the main factors for us to decide to launch our audit.
Thank you for that. For you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Hayes, you stated that discussions have started with the team at SDTC. Who is your office in contact with at SDTC? Who is that team?
So I think when I mentioned the team, I mean our audit team has started discussions with SDTC. I would expect that it's their management at this point, but I don't have specifics on who exactly that is.
Well, can you confirm, because I note that in the 2017 audit,
Very briefly, Mr.
the
Barrett,
staff
or
was
Mr. Cooper,
interviewed,
pardon me.
but can you commit that the audit team will interview executives and the chair at SDTC, ISET officials, including the...
I'm going to cut you off there, but I will allow Mr.
Okay.
Hayes just a brief answer on that, please.
I can assure this committee and Parliament that we will always do rigorous work. We will talk to everybody that we need to talk to.
Thank you very much. Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes, for coming. We usually see you and the rest of the team at the Auditor General when reports are completed. So I thank you for your time today. Can you explain the different approaches between choosing and deciding to conduct an audit for a federal department compared to a different entity such as an arm's length foundation like SDTC?
Yes, so the main difference lies in the authorities that we have under our Act. So we recognize that that departments and crown corporations and foundations operate in different spheres within the federal family. We have had since 2006, I believe, a mandate to be able to, as we sometimes put it, follow the dollar through funding agreements, provided that the particular thresholds are met and that it's not one of the kind of prohibited types of organizations that we cannot follow to, like a provincial government or a municipal government. But with an organization like Sustainable Development Technology Canada and the department that they work with, the area that they are responsible for, it's an area that comes up periodically in our natural audit selection process. In this case, this would be different than our normal audit selection process. The 2017 report would be a good example of how it comes up normally. In this case, we received allegations. We'd been monitoring what has been happening. We've been engaging with the department. We saw the report. And along the way, we had identified that we should be ready just in case to step in and do some audit work. That, again, I want to reinforce that was our decision. That was nobody else's decision. We made that on the basis of weighing all the factors at play here and recognizing the importance of the work that SDTC is doing. So I hope I've answered your question there.
Yes. So you mentioned that the audit process this time is different from what you normally do. And can you just tell us what you normally do in an audit process?
So the selection process has been different just because of the way that this has come to our attention. Much like how when we receive a request from a committee to do an audit, that might not have been on our plan before. The actual audit process, the way we're going to conduct the audit, will be exactly the same as we do other performance audits.
So that would be like document collection, for example?
Document collection, interviews of witnesses. We follow audit standards all the way through. We're careful to make sure that our report is factually accurate and fair and represents everything that we find in our audit work. So that will all be the same. Obviously, given the importance of timing for this organization, for Parliament, we're going to try to accelerate and be flexible with our audit process as we move forward, but we're not going to sacrifice quality in order to move faster.
So I understand that the OAG is not looking into the HR practices from SDTC. Can you explain why your office is not able to look into these practices and really what the focus of your audit is going to be?
Okay, so I might just clarify, at this point in time, we are still determining the full scope of our work. The HR practices, that's an area that we may not have the same kind of hook as, say, for example, looking at whether or not recipients were eligible, whether payments were made that were proper, conflict of interest rules, that sort of thing. We know that would fit squarely within the scope of what we can do. There's open questions around how far we can go on the HR side. We're still going to look and see how far we can go with that, though.
Okay. Is there an expected timeline for this audit to be completed?
We are hoping to be able to submit the final report to Parliament before the summer recess.
Is this your only audit, or is it possible for your office to come back with more questions?
I would expect that we are going to be able to deal with everything in one report with this one. But we're always going to keep our options open as we move through and get into the files, see what we find.
Okay. Thank you. Chair?
You got about time for one more question, or it's about 10 seconds, so it's your call.
Okay, I'll just say thank you very much again for coming.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much. Maintenant, c'est encore Madame Sécla Desgagnés. Vous avez la...
Madame Desgagnés, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the whistleblowers, I'd like to know whether they were all from SDTC or are other people involved in the allegations that were made. I don't know. I have no information as to how many people contacted our office. This is something that one of our auditors could look into and provide information, but right now I don't view this as being important. I know that there are reports, there are people in the foundation, but I don't know who they are. I'd like to ask you a more general question. The government is giving more and more money to third-party or crown corporations at public accounts. I've already raised this issue. I find this unfortunate because our role at public accounts is to hold the government to account. The departments have certain criteria. They have to be transparent, but not the same as what we see in SDTC. You must have an opinion on the fact that billions of dollars go through the public coffers, and a citizen or a member sitting here around the table has a right to know where the money has gone and how taxpayers' money is being spent. That's a political question for the government. I would say that in the case of crown corporations, which are not under direct government control, and the example of a foundation such as SDTC, which is even further removed, there are differences, but we do have a mandate to examine the funding agreements, and I'm hoping that our report will provide the information you're looking for. Sorry.
Again, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you, Mr. Hayes, for being present in our committee to update us on this important work. I look forward to your report. You made mention that it will be available before the summer recess of 2024. Is that correct?
That's our hope at this point. I mean, we're planning as if that's going to be achievable. Obviously, I'm going to just say that we don't know until we get in there what we're going to find.
Exactly. And then throughout the course of this work, and I have seen this in other audits as well, should there be additional evidence, the auditing team would be willing to take that into consideration as well?
Absolutely. And if there is a delay or if things look like we're going to need more time, we will, as always, inform the committee about that.
And then my last series of questions is a summary in relation to innovation, science, and economic development being the ministry responsible in some ways for the operations at SDTC. You mentioned in my previous questions that much of your work would be in relation to the study of the actual contribution agreement, and that limits within that contribution agreement could prescribe limits to your scope in understanding abuses, particularly abuses related to or claims of abuse related to HR management. What other restrictions do you think you can face in scope in relation to the contribution agreement?
At this point in time, related to the matters that were covered in the report from RCGT, we don't see any obvious limitations, but if something comes up, obviously we would be transparent about that.
All right. Well, I think that's nearly my time. I just want to thank you again. And Chair,
You've still got 30 seconds.
Mr.
Digital, you still have 30 seconds by my clock.
I'll give it to you, Chair, since you never have the opportunity to ask one question.
I appreciate that. I do have the Chair's discretion, which I just use rarely, and I am pleased with the questions we're hearing today. So I will turn it over then to Mr. Brock. I'm not adding his time to your time. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Hayes. Thank you for your attendance. At the heart of this Liberal scandal is the payment under Minister Philip Champagne's department is the payment of at least $40 million to companies that did not meet the funding criteria. And I say at least $40 million because some of the media reports seem to indicate that that's probably the bare minimum. We're talking about other tens of millions of dollars that went to new funding streams, new companies being created under funding agreements that did not accord with the original funding agreement with the federal government. So in my view, that raises criminality. And I know that the original report from RCGT put restrictions that this is in no way an admission of any liability, civil or criminal. I know that no police agency has taken this on their own. So I'm going to turn to you, sir, because I know that part of your department, there is a mandate to turn matters over to the police where you discover criminality. So I'd like to ask you specifically as to what that threshold is. What is that legal threshold or administrative threshold where you believe that the police need to investigate? And to give you an example, when police investigate any crime, from shoplifting to homicide, their governing doctrine is, do we have evidence of probable and reasonable grounds to charge someone or to arrest someone, which is distinct from the prosecutor's threshold, which is proof beyond a reasonable doubt before anyone can be convicted. So what is the threshold, legal or administrative, within your department?
So typically in these kinds of situations where we're auditing a program and there are matters that come to our attention that raise questions about wrongdoing, we will follow the trail as far as we can. We'll gather as much information as we can. We will make a determination at some point in time, once we hit a sufficient amount of evidence of wrongdoing, to turn it over to law enforcement. Now, historically, there have been a number of cases where that's happened. The sponsorship scandal might have been one of them. I'm not entirely sure, but there were definitely examples where, for example, with the correctional investigator, his conduct himself, we turned matters over to the RCMP. There were other files where there was potential fraud that we turned over. We are not in the business of determining mens rea. The guilty mind is not our area of expertise. We gather facts, and when we feel that there is a risk that there might be criminality, and it's not the level of reasonable doubt, it's not the level of sufficient grounds to proceed with an investigation, we turn it over to the RCMP. We allow them to determine whether they're going to seek a production order or a warrant, and they do their thing.
So what that tells me, sir, is that your department, the Auditor General's mandate, is an extremely low threshold standard. It's not a mens rea standard. It's not a police standard. It's not a prosecution standard. If you uncover in your belief some evidence, whether that's a little bit of evidence or a multitude of evidence, that could constitute criminality, you're going to refer this to the police.
I think I would qualify that by saying that the Auditor General Act gives the Auditor General the ability or the authority to inform senior public officials about matters discovered in our audit.
I'm going to stop you right there, sir, just because of a shortness of time. I've identified, just on reviewing the material that I've reviewing the material from RCGT, I've identified 2 potential criminal charges that this government could be facing, as well as the company in question, SDTC. That is government fraud pursuant to Section 121 of the Criminal Code, and fraud pursuant to Section 380 of the Criminal Code. 380 of the Criminal Code says everyone who by deceit, falsehood, or other fraudulent means, whether or not it is a false pretense within the meaning of the Act, defrauds the public of any person, whether ascertained or not, of any property, money, or valuable security, is guilty of an indictable offense.
And that is your time, I'm afraid, Mr.
Thank you.
Rock. Yes. Attorney Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 5 minutes as well, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hayes, for being here today. Just to continue on the questioning of Mr. Brock, how long, I mean, I've read articles about this having SDTC being established since 2001. Is that, are these wrongdoings from that time? What is the time frame that you're looking at?
So at this point, we have allegations that are more recent than that. We did an audit in 2017, and the findings of our audit are available, but we didn't identify problems at that point in time. So at this stage of the game, I think we would be looking at our scope being after 2017. However, if while we're doing that work we find something of
how prevalent are issues like these within our departments?
I don't know if I'm able to comment on those sort of things. We get allegations like this. We look at them carefully. Sometimes the departments have taken action already. Sometimes they're just control problems. Sometimes they're approval problems. But in this case, with RCGT preparing a report and the questions that were left with that report, we determined that this was one that we needed to look at.
Thanks. And I realized that the minister for ISA, he launched a fact-finding expedition as soon as this became public knowledge, or as soon as he became aware of this. So I also wonder how common is that, and has such an act been done in the past before?
What I would say is that in departments, crown corporations, et cetera, there's often an internal audit shop. At times when you want something independent to be done, you will contract out to get a objective, independent view. That happens, I would say, regularly. In this case, it's a bit different because the Sustainable Development Technology Canada is a foundation that is at arm's length. So the minister launching the fact-finding exercise was important. We were watching carefully and were very interested when that report was presented. And I believe that the minister has considered other options in terms of another audit, but we're getting in there as well. So maybe the minister will or will not have another audit done. We're going to get to the bottom of the things that we want to look at.
So when you talk about arm's length, do cabinet or any ministers or the prime minister have any say in how these funds are allocated, or in the actions of these individuals that we're talking about here?
I really don't know the answer to that question. That's going to be something that we would look at during our audit if there was direction or influence or otherwise. I'm hoping that would come out when we audit, but I don't know on a structural level yet how this works. We will talk about the accountability relationship for this organization when we do present our report.
Are there any loopholes or any broken pieces of the system that you want to highlight for us today?
Well, I think the reason why this is a big audit for us to do is conflict of interest, and particularly when it relates to funding decisions from government organizations is always important. The ability to engage and trust government with funding programs, whether it's the COVID-19 benefit programs that we've already audited, or other audits that we have done in the past. The importance here is public trust, transparency, and public trust. So, at this point, I think that's the best way I could answer that question.
And how do other countries deal with issues like this?
I'm not sure that I'm in a position to comment on that.
Have you had maybe a comparative analysis as to how other countries have their process for holding government to account or for issues like this?
We know that there are definitely auditors general that are very similar to us across the world. There are public accounts committees very similar to this one across the world. There are commissions of inquiry that happen. There are a number of ways that things can be pursued. In my view, at this stage, this is probably the best way to get to the bottom of what's happening and to provide Parliament with objective and impartial information on what's going on with this foundation.
And that is the time, Ms. Khalid.
Last question, Chair.
I'm afraid your time is up, Ms. Khalid.
Thank
Mr.
you very
Barrett, you
much.
have the floor for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. So after RCGT released their report, SDTC responded. But I want to be clear that in this billion-dollar Liberal slush fund, $40 million was reviewed by RCGT, but it didn't provide the fund with a clean bill of health. And though the statement that was issued by SDTC said, quote, no clear evidence of wrongdoing or misconduct, it found, quote, no clear evidence of wrongdoing or misconduct, end quote, that seems entirely inconsistent with the reality of the situation. Having my review of the situation following discussions with the whistleblower and reviewing media reports, I wrote to your office requesting an audit. Your office had reviewed the report and has spoken with some of the players and has also launched and has now launched an audit. Is it credible to have the people who presided over the era in question to be charged by the Department of Innovation with implementing the minister's recommendations to rectify the issues that have been raised?
If I might just address the STTC statement, I'll note that they also said that no further investigation is merited. From our perspective, there is merit to doing a deeper dive into this. And the other point that we wanted to look into is the statement that they made that regular business operations will continue, including the dispersal of funds for all existing projects in our portfolio in accordance with companies' contribution agreements. We feel that there was a need to dig deeper. Now, your specific question was about the competence of management to be able to rectify this. I don't have an opinion at this stage. This will be something that we will go in and audit. But if there are problems, we will highlight them. And I know that the government is aware as well of the nature of the allegations and the work that we're going to do. Well, thank you. I'm going to share some of my time with Mr. Brock in just a moment. But in light of the amount of funds that are available and the impropriety, the misconduct allegations that have been raised, the potential of fraud outlined by my colleague, Mr. Brock, is this the type of situation where funds should be suspended and their dispersal should not be continued? So that is a decision that is for the government and the foundation to make. I do note that they have, I believe they've suspended the approval of new projects. At this point, we would need to do our work and make a recommendation. Thank you very much. I have about 2 minutes and 10 seconds left. I'd like to turn the time to Mr. Brock, Mr. Chair.
I finished off by reading out to you Section 380 sub 1 of the Criminal Code, which speaks to fraud. The allegations, in my respectful view, sir, as a former Crown attorney, raise this to a possible fraud investigation, particularly when you're talking about grants, free money, free taxpayer money to startups with ties to own senior management raises a very, very high threshold, in my view, of criminality. My concern is this. Given the RCMP's handling already of Justin Trudeau's Aga Khan affair, the illegal vacation, most recently the SNC Lavalin affair where he refused to cooperate with the RCMP.
1 second, Mr. Brock. I have a point of order, please. Ms. Khalid, yes.
I would like to question the relevance of what Mr. Brock is asking.
I actually don't think that's a point of order. Mr. Brock has the floor.
Relevance is definitely a point of order, Mr. Chair.
I find his questioning to be quite illuminating and in line with this committee's review of this question. And Mr. Hayes has proven himself to be a very able witness, and I'm sure he will provide any information that he feels relevant in this. And if he does not, he will say so as well. Mr. Brock, the floor is yours again.
Given how some Canadians, if not millions of Canadians, feel that the RCMP mishandled both criminal investigations involving our sitting Prime Minister, is there any prohibition from your department of referring criminality with respect to the handling of this particular scandal to the Ontario Provincial Police, in addition to the RCMP, who also have jurisdiction over the entire province of Ontario? Is there any impediment to do so, sir? I
would say that the normal course for us is to deal with the RCMP in matters such as this. I don't know whether or not we have referred a matter to another law enforcement agency before. For example, if we ever came across an individual situation where we might engage with Ottawa Police or OPP. I don't know if we've done that before. I don't believe that there's a prohibition, and certainly there wouldn't be a prohibition from us responding to a production order or a warrant from...
My last question, sir. Are you prepared to table the unredacted report from RCGT to this committee?
I think that would be a matter for the department. I haven't reviewed the redacted or the unredacted report, but I think that would be a question for the department.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brock, Mr. Hayes. Now turning to Ms. Bradford, I believe. Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to review to get on the record. So once ISED became aware of these allegations of mismanagement in the spring of this year, they hired a third party to do a fact-finding exercise. And that report was published in October. And so with suggestions and action plan that the SDTC had to implement by December 2023, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Right, and so immediately then they froze funds so that there would be no further allocations made in the meantime while these things were investigated, right?
I believe that what was suspended was new project approvals, but
Right.
that existing funding agreements would still
Be honored. Right,
Yeah.
okay. And so then I presume as a result of that report, that's how your office then decided it was, appropriate to do an audit. But I believe that, but your audit isn't going to look at HR issues because initially you feel that's out of your area, but it could be reviewed down the line, or?
We're concerned that the HR practices of the organization might not be within the mandate of our office, but we are still determining our scope. We're going to go as broad as we can.
But I believe the ISED has also indicated that there'll be a parallel third-party investigation that's going to look at only HR practices, that's going to be going on at the same time as you're doing your audit. Is that correct?
I believe that there was an announcement or there was a decision at the end of October about an independent fact-finding exercise regarding human resources allegations. I believe that it might have been something that was approved by the STTC board, but I'm only going on secondhand information at that point.
Okay. So, and the period of your audit is going to go from 2021 forward initially?
Still determining that. What I can say is it's going to be after. We'll start with after 2017. What date we start with is still to be determined, but we will look a few years back at the very least.
But getting back to that Environmental Commission report of 2017, at that time, the findings was that SDDC had good processes in place regarding the awarding of funding. There was no red flags or any indication there that anything was out of order.
No, that's right. I think we made one recommendation to SDTC, but it wasn't related to their approval processes.
And like you say, in order for you to come out that positive, you have to be pretty confident that things seem to be in pretty good order.
Yes, and thank you for that opportunity to clarify my answer. We're always confident with our reports and our findings. We are very careful. I wanted to emphasize the point that when we report something positive to Parliament, it's because it's deserved.
Right, right. Okay, so it appears that any problems that may have arisen have been reasonably recent because they didn't have a history of having problems in this department with that.
My presumption is that we will go in there and look at the last number of years. If there's reason to believe that there was anything before 2017, we'll look at that too. But we'll start from the perspective that our report in 2017 provides a line in the sand from which we would move forward.
Right, right. And so basically, and I know there's a lot of concern because SDTC is a separate organization and not governed by the same whistleblower protection that government departments are. There is concern on the case of those employees. But I believe ISED has said that current and former employees will be able to freely speak with that law firm that's investigating without violating any applicable settlement agreements or non-disclosure agreements.
So on that, we would be asking similar questions when we do our preliminary scoping and audit work. If you would just give me an opportunity to make one statement, the importance of whistleblowers and their ability to speak freely without fear of reprisal is fundamental, because otherwise you lose the transparency and the ability to hold organizations to account. So I would hope that all efforts that can be made to protect these whistleblowers are going to be taken by all organizations involved.
Right, right, that's fine. I don't have any further questions.
You're about at your time anyway, so I was going to
That's
see if you
good
did.
then.
A very quick
Worked
one,
out.
so all right. Madame Secrétaire de Gavé, vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Ms. Deschenets, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, and I'll add the 20 seconds that Mr. Desjardins had. You talked about transparency of the departments and transparency for nonprofits such as SDTC or Crown corporations. You have a mandate to look at the funding agreements, etc. But please confirm, do you look at the departments annually, or is it intermittently every 6 years? What applies to the Crown corporations? Well, Crown corporations are subject to special evaluation regularly, every 10 years. Every 10 years. But we can conduct other audits, and we can do special evaluations at shorter intervals. But as for the departments, we have a selection process every year. We look at all of the programs, all of the risks, and we obtain information from our financial audits and public accounts. So we use all of this information to determine which audits we will pursue. What seems to be clear in this case, well, the last audit goes back to 2017, 6 years ago. So now you're going to do another study 7 years later. But you wouldn't have done this if you had not received these allegations. So if the government were to manage taxpayers' monies itself in the departments, you would be looking at the figures annually. And that's a difference, and a big difference when it comes to transparency. So government spends billions of dollars to agencies that don't have the same transparency requirements, and that is contempt for the taxpayers. And then as a member of the Public Accounts Committee, I find it very unfortunate that you are not able to look at these agencies more often. We see that the taxpayer money is spent in a very opaque way, and we don't have most of the information that we need to have from them. So I think that we look at the transparency, and in this case, we can see that there's clearly a problem, and this problem could have been avoided if ISED had the same requirements. Thank you, Mr. Gagné.
For 2.5 minutes, please.
Sorry, Chair, how long was that?
2.5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Thank you. And just another point of question, if I can, without reduction of my time.
Yeah, no, I'll pause it.
Round
Yeah,
after this?
go ahead. Pardon me?
Do we have one more round after this?
Well, my intention, subject to the will of the room, is to hear from you, the Conservatives, and then end with the government members, and then to move on to the next business.
I'll ask my last question now then.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. It's a broader question in some ways. Are you concerned in some part with the fact that there are many of these types of agreements that are both at arm's length, or I think you described it in those words, at arm's length from the government? And I'm just more growing concerned about the comment in relation to your scope being restricted because of because of the contribution agreement. Is this a way, is it a concern to you and to the Auditor General's office in a larger and more broader sense that these agreements could harbor points of access to, or even areas or barriers to your scope, not just for this particular audit, but for other audits as well?
So this gives me an opportunity to maybe blend a few answers here. I think that it's difficult to say whether or not we would have gone in to audit SDTC without the allegations, but we do always monitor the budget implementation acts and the amounts that organizations get. SDTC, for example, is in the public accounts, so it is it's a component that we do look at in our financial audit work. With a large amount of money and a big program, it's possible that we would have gone in again at some point. The fact that we do have the follow the dollar mandate in our act is a very important tool for us. Before we didn't have that, and we wouldn't have had the ability to do what we're doing right now. So the biggest constraint that I'm worried about is the scope of the funding agreement, the limits that we might have. And I don't think that there are going to be any real constraints for us in this apart from the human resources side, but we still have to determine that.
And in that perspective of following the dollar and the issues related to the scope, why is it that HR issues can't be seen or reviewed by your office?
Comes down to the level of control that the government has, and at the inside management decisions that don't relate to the funding agreement may be a little further outside of our scope than the other decisions relating to the implementation or execution of the funding agreement.
So if the
quick question, please, Mr. Desjardins. Just a quick question, but go ahead.
Okay, I'll be very fast. Just in relation to the follow the dollar, and in the instance where administration fees are tacked on to these agreements, would that allow you the access to the scope in order to include issues of HR?
We would definitely be able to look at administration fees that were connected to the funding agreement. Whether or not that provides a deep enough hook for overall HR management is an open question for us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barrett, you have the floor again for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair. So we've heard from the government that they're going to participate or cooperate with the Auditor General's office, with your office on this. Aren't they required to participate? Their willingness is not an open question.
No, we have a statutory power that allows us access to information and officials in a timely way.
Okay. And did you meet with the Department of Innovation? You've met with them up to this point?
Yes.
And how many times?
I don't know if I can give you an exact number. It's regular. Since September, it's been more frequent. I'm going to say it's more than 5 times since September that I have met with senior officials.
Did you meet with them last week?
Yes.
And were you happy with the outcome and the productivity of that meeting?
Well, we informed them that we were conducting an audit on the basis of the information that we had to date and asked for information which we received. So I am satisfied with everything to date.
Okay. Were they pleased to receive the news that they were going to be audited, that SDTC was going to be audited?
I think that I would say that they accepted, as most organizations do, that we are coming in. And I do think that in the discussions that we've been having with them, the fact that there are open questions is something that needs to be sorted out.
Sure. Do you know anything about the scope of the RCGT report?
So we do have information from the department about the scope and the approach that RCGT took. I have those documents. I haven't read them yet, but I have them.
Do you know if they interviewed the whistleblowers?
I don't know.
Do you know if they interviewed all of the executive members?
Again, I don't know. I have that information. I don't know, though. Yeah.
Were there any? Do you know if there were changes requested by ISED to RCGT with respect to the final report?
I believe that there were. However, that in and of itself is not necessarily a red flag. It's something to look at. But I'll use our reports as an example. As we prepare reports and we share them with the entities being audited, at times there are things that require adjustment because they don't come across factually accurately, even though that's our intention. So we will look at the past reports. We have access to them. I believe we even have them. But that in and of itself is not dispositive of a problem.
And you're not aware offhand then what the requested changes were?
I don't know. Yeah,
Okay.
offhand.
Well, that's something for the ministry staff who are tuned in today to note in anticipation of the minister's appearance at a different committee on Monday. Do you know the date that PCO, on which date PCO raised the issue that was referred to PCO by you? What date they raised that with ISED?
That would be a question for the department. Like I said earlier, I know that PCO moved very quickly. My recollection is not exact in terms of what happened in January and February, but I'm almost positive that it happened in February.
Okay. And who is in charge of governance? Like who's in charge of governance at Sustainable Development Technology Canada?
I would have to say that accountability rests with the CEO, with the president.
Okay. So the CEO will be who you're primarily working with, your office is primarily working with?
We'll work with all management,
Okay.
and including the CEO, yeah.
And if the CEO and the board chair or other members of the executive or other members of the management are implicated by your findings or by the findings of the Raymond Chabot Grant Thornton report that was commissioned by ISED, is that something that's concerning? Like, how do we accept the findings if the people who are being investigated are supposed to be the ones who are, unlocking filing cabinets and releasing documents that you request?
So as far as audit standards go, we have to have confidence in the integrity of management, and we will do our testing for that. We will also make sure that we have access to everything. If we have any concerns about access, we'll raise them. But our work will be rigorous and extensive. So if there are any concerns, if there are controls, processes, et cetera, that need to be tightened because there were problems, we will raise them. And we typically make recommendations, and organizations have action plans that put them on the spot, frankly. So I think at this point in time, the next step is to get the objective, impartial information that we're going to bring forward. And I know that the department has already been working with the organization on an action plan. We're going to be looking at the implementation of that action plan at the end of the day. If there are other things that need to be done to make sure that this organization operates well, then
Thank you.
We'll be able to have that conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes.
Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor now for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. J'ai toujours confiance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have confidence in you. You ensure that all members get their proper time allocation. And this meeting that we have today is with Mr. Hayes is special. And the visit from that aren't usually under the purview of this committee, but it's an opportunity for all members and parties to understand how things work in the OAG. And I'd like to thank Mr. Hayes because we do understand we can't talk about an audit before it's actually completed. So I'd like to thank you. And I thank you for conducting this investigation at the OAG. This is something the office is mandated to do, and we are confident that your office is neutral, fact-based, impartial, and I do appreciate today's testimony. I'd like to give Mr. Hayes an opportunity, Mr. Chair, to summarize what he said today and to reassure Canadians that we can have confidence in this process, which was initiated by the OAG. But I'd also like to say that the department also made a commitment to conduct its own investigation.
From here forward, this will look like any other audit for Parliament and for the committee. We will do our work, as we always do, according to audit standards. We will have access to the department officials, to the foundation officials that we need to have access to, and the information that we need. If we have any problems, as always, we will report it to Parliament. The decision that we took to launch this audit was one that we made on the basis of our independence. And we will always protect our independence vigorously. The fact that we are here before this committee talking today, I know that it can be at times frustrating for us not to be able to share some preliminary findings or the like. But it is important that we preserve the integrity of our audit process, and that the important step of providing our report and appearing in front of the committee after the report has been produced, transparently answering all of those questions at that point, that's a critical aspect of our work. So we look forward to being back here with the representatives of the department and the foundation at the end of our audit work. Thank you very much.
I have another question. Apparently, well, the way that our committee works, we always, is based on when we get the OAG's office, and then we invite witnesses. But other countries operate in a different fashion. Apparently, there are other committees that are going to be studying this issue. In your opinion, do you think that that's problematic? Do you think that will hurt the work you do? And how do you see it? No. In all of the comparisons, well, I must say that we can't comment on the facts that are contained in reports. We're prepared, we're always prepared to appear before House of Commons committees or Senate committees. And it's important to say that our independence is essential to us, and we will preserve this independence. Just a brief question. Confidentiality. I know accusations have been made about this. I have experienced situations in committee where the names of individuals, the names of private citizens were circulated and they were condemned. Question, please. I'd like to have reassurances that this will remain confidential. We will be careful with the names of individuals and corporations that are involved in our audit. In our report, when necessary, we need to sometimes identify people when decisions have been made, and this is a decision that we don't take very seriously, considering all kinds of factors. Thank you.
We want to thank you for appearing here today, and you certainly have nothing to deflect when it comes to the manner in which you answered your questions. We know the rules going in that you don't release any results until the report is tabled to Parliament. So, in fact, you would probably be offside if you were to do that today, because Parliament is supreme. I'm going to excuse the witness now, and again, thank you very much for appearing here. And please, you know this, and if you could pass on to the auditor, we are always happy to receive you here. And thank you again for being here and for fielding our questions. I'm sure we'll see you all again soon. On that note, I'm going to suspend this meeting. We will then go in camera to resume committee business. And I'll just remind folks, if you have no business before the committee in the in-camera portion, to please excuse yourselves as well. Thank you very much.
you.